27.8 million South Africans are currently receiving social grants, sometimes just to survive. That's nearly 50% of the population. It's one of the very sobering revelations in today's medium-term budget policy statement presented by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. He said revenue for the year was better than expected due to a windfall for mining companies that's led to better taxation. But at the same time, South Africa's debt problem is not going away. The Finance Minister confirming that South Africa now owes 4 trillion rand to its creditors. From next year, servicing debt costs will be the biggest expenditure item on the budget. Let's discuss. We're now joined by Dr Thabi Leoka, economist. Thabi, thank you for being with us. Let's look at the good. Growth above 5% this year, more tax revenue from those miners. But looking ahead, economic growth, he said, will average 1.7%. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that means that we're getting poorer. That doesn't even keep up with population growth. What do the figures say about South Africa overall?
Thank you. So just to start, I actually really liked the MTBPS. It's not often that I'm fully satisfied with it, but I thought it was very fair. It covered some of our, big issues, economic issues, and also provided some solutions. And obviously we'll get more clarity in next year's budget on the spending and taxes. But in terms of, whether we're getting poorer or not, I think that we are getting poorer. I think we do have evidence that income growth has slowed over the years, but as a country, economic growth is not, it's really slow, and it's going to be slower in the next couple of years, as the National Treasury's forecast have alluded to. And I expect not just in the next 2 years or beyond just 2021, but if we don't adopt the necessary reforms, we will be growing less than 2% for much longer than 2 years.
Well, let's look at the reforms that he mentioned. Speaking about renewables coming onto the grid, we'll talk about Eskom as well. The corporatization of Transnet's ports, Transnet allowing private rail operators to come onto those rail systems. He's talking about the e-visa system. Is he saying the right things? And I guess is government doing the right things at a quick enough pace? Many would say no.
I think you're absolutely right by saying is government, because there's an assumption that Treasury is at fault. And Treasury is actually there to allocate resources and to advise in terms of where resources should be allocated to generate growth. The ministers, so the rest of government, are the ones that are supposed to implement these policies. A few years ago, National Treasury published a very brilliant report on reforms. They focused on network industries, reform of transportation, telecommunication, etc., energy reform, and all those that you've mentioned earlier. And we will keep on mentioning this until they are implemented. So you need government to expedite the reforms so that we get employment as a result of those reforms. And then we will start chipping at poverty and also start seeing growth. But until such time that we don't adopt or implement those reforms, and this is not the first time, we've been talking about reforms, I think, for the past 20 years, and it does get frustrating, but we need to reform this economy so that it can generate growth.
Doesn't Treasury play a role? The Eskom CEO speaking earlier, and I don't want to misquote him, but he said that it took a very long time to get the funds from Treasury when there were exemptions or when they were trying to bring in parts and things like that. So surely that has to be addressed.
Definitely, I think that we need to prioritize Eskom. Unfortunately, there's no going around. We can't ignore Eskom. If it collapses, that is a national catastrophe. It will really sink the economy and business, households, etc. So we do need to ensure and support and financially Eskom, but we also need to make sure that we have a just transition. So Eskom needs to move from fossil fuels into more renewable energy. We also need to support renewable energy companies so that our energy sources are not just from one entity, they're from multiple entities. We also need to make sure that the regulation is not punitive or is not also, it allows for companies to start easily processing or their own electricity, or generating their own electricity rather. And a few months ago there was an announcement that industry and also qualifying municipalities can generate their own electricity up to 100 megawatts. We need to make sure that is done, and it's done quick and easy, and not put restrictions on these companies and municipalities as they move towards generating their own electricity.
Thabi, before the budget, we heard different explanations about what was really going on in terms of blackouts that we saw. One minister saying the problem is all Eskom, another saying, no, we need the renewables to come online. That hasn't happened quick enough. Then we heard about cable theft from the president. Do you agree with our earlier guest that this is a huge concession that government is making, or the finance minister is making, by saying today that all our efforts, he said, all our efforts over the past 13 years have been to fix Eskom instead of adding additional capacity to the grid, basically saying that we've been incredibly late to the party?
Absolutely. I mean, we've had, disruptions in electricity supply, rolling blackouts for over a decade now. And we thought that by now we'd have Kusile and Dupi producing sufficient electricity, and that's not the case. And it seems as if it will take even longer than we anticipated. I don't expect it to be both power stations to be fully operational in the next 2 to 3 years, for instance. So we need to find solutions so that we can secure reliable energy sources. We cannot rely on one energy source. It's very risky, as we know. We need to diversify.
Overall, the rand looks stronger. Is there a sense of confidence? I mean, when Enoch Godongwana came in, many said that he would basically follow in the footsteps of Tito Mboweni. We wouldn't see any dramatic shifts. Are we on a stable path that inspires confidence?
So the minister, had to adopt or continue with what the former minister's policies and that he had, in order for him not to interrupt or disrupt, rather, fiscal policy, and also to ensure that there is continuity. So I think that the rand actually responded very well. It weakened slightly because of data from the US, the CPI data that came out yesterday, but we saw a strengthening of the rand. What was really impressive was the bond yields. The 10-year bond yields were just loving the MTBPS. That is an indication that investors are buying into our debt, and that they're actually also, what it means is that the interest on our debt has declined as a result of favorable bond yields. So the bond market seems to be very pleased, and we should basically keep this up.
And it seems like he is pleasing everybody to a certain extent, because we're not hearing the same criticism about austerity, government not being accused of just targeting, bringing down debt. I think what he's saying is that we will keep debt high, we'll try not let it spiral out of control, but there are other things we have to worry about as well. So that's something we just have to hold in tension.
Absolutely. So we really haven't had austerity. Where we attempted to, we've said it in paper, but we've never implemented it. And as a result, actually, our spending has increased over the time. But what I particularly liked about the speech was that he mentioned how redistributive our fiscal policy has been over the years. Our national budget accommodates for social welfare, and not just from the social welfare, from social grants, for instance, but We see social support in health, in transportation, in various other departments. And I think about 60% of non-interest spending accounts for all the social spending. So there has been a lot of support for social spending and social welfare. I have no doubt that they will extend it, but I would like to see short-term extension of social support, but more emphasis on sustainable growth that will lead to more employment, more upskilling, and less people being unemployed. I just don't agree with just giving people 350 rands and in perpetuity and not doing anything about employing them where they could actually get more money and also get the skills. And so that's what I would prefer. So I'm hoping that, yes, he will support in the short term, because a lot of South Africans have been impacted by the pandemic. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of shops, restaurants, etc., factories have closed down. And those people need support so that they can come back and help grow the economy. But I'd like to emphasize that giving fiscal, financial support is a short-term measure. What we need with, 44% of the South Africans who are of working age are unemployed, we need to get those people back in work.
All right, thank you very much. Much appreciated, Dr. Thabi Leoka, economist.